Item 4, work sessions. A, state legislative update. Ms. Spillman.
I'm just going to stay right here if that's okay. Well, again, thank you for having us. It's been a little bit of a rough start, kicking off General Assembly amidst a water crisis in Richmond. So there was a 3-day delay, which also extended deadlines for bill filings and budget amendments. However, we've had a really busy 2 weeks analyzing those bills, reviewing budget amendments, and the committee meetings and meeting with legislators. Today marks day 13 or 15, depending upon how you're counting, of a short 46-day session. So just a couple key dates I want to run through with you. The last Friday, January 17th, was the last day to file bills. So we believe that most of those have hit the airwaves, but there could still be a few trickling in. Over the weekend, we saw a mass download of what had been filed as of Friday. Sunday, February 2nd, is Budget Sunday. That's the deadline for House Appropriations and Senate Finance to report on their respective budgets by midnight. February 4th is crossover, and that's the deadline when each chamber has to take action on the legislation that originated in that chamber. February 12th is the deadline for each chamber to complete their consideration on the other chamber's budget bills. February 17th is the deadline for committee action on legislation by midnight, and so February 22nd is the day that is scheduled to adjourn sine die. On April 2nd, that's the day scheduled for the reconvene session on consideration of the governor's amendments and vetoes. So as of this morning, there was about 2,000 bills exclusive of resolutions that have been filed. And so we've identified about 414 bills that we're further analyzing and tracking. We have 12 days left until crossover. And so that means the next week is really full of some big dockets, long meetings. Just broad topics that have dominated the local government conversation so far are really focusing on housing, land use, public safety, local governance, environmental, and then I'm going to bring up a juvenile justice topic that we're dealing with too. So I sent you all a pretty comprehensive list last Friday, and we'll continue to do those weekly updates with you, but just a couple of updates from the committee meetings that have happened this week on those bills. So Senator Van Valkenburg, SB 838, was introduced related to recovery residences, and this would amend legislation on the penalty piece in particular, making it a Class 1 misdemeanor for those who were not in compliance. It also establishes a work group that would be led by DBHDS and looking at providing and establishing the regulatory framework to how we would address recovery residences, looking to put some protections in place for the vulnerable population that's receiving these community recovery services. So it was reassigned from Senate Ed last week and is making its way. We expect to see it on the agenda for Friday in Senate Rehab with some minor amendments that we submitted to the senator. They're taking they were very appreciative of their work with us, and so got just some technical amendments in there that they've incorporated, and so we're supportive of that bill. Senator Salim had an ADU bill, and this is the accessory dwelling unit bill that was similar to what was in place or what was presented last year. That bill failed. It's still problematic. It's mandating ADUs as a by right use. It was a hotly debated topic during the Housing Commission this summer, and so it went to Senate Local Gov. Actually, it made it to the floor. The floor sent it back to Senate Local Gov, and then there was debate among Senator Stanley and Senator Salim. Senator Stanley's carrying a version that was supported and endorsed by the Housing Commission, where you could incorporate ADUs within your comp plan as a permissive option, local option. And so he's offered to have Senator Salim co-patron his bill, but that offer has been denied. And so they had been sent aside by the week to take some more conversation and figure out, is there anywhere to find resolution. There's a few bad housing bills that died this week, and so one of those would have permitted by right multifamily residential in all commercial and business districts, and the other one would have put in place statewide housing targets that would have required localities to increase their housing stock by at least 7.5% over a 5-year period. So those bills have both failed. Senator Hashmi introduced her Faith in Housing bill again this year with significant revisions. And so the bill ultimately did not receive endorsement out of the Housing Commission, but there was, again, a significant overhaul in the bill itself. And the version that has been reported out from committee we believe is something that we can live with. And so the basic tenets of that bill are requiring localities to address properties owned by religious organizations or those that have some there's specific language for nonprofit status, that there's a consideration in your comprehensive plan for how to address those properties, but there's not a mandate on what you have to do with them. So some permissibility for how localities can handle that. Again, that bill passed out of the committee on a 12-3 vote, and expect that it's going to go through the Senate and cross over. Delegate Carr is carrying the House version of that bill. We had a couple of environmental bills come up this week. One of them, the Dam Safety Act. This was language introduced, and actually our own Jess Robinson was on the work group committee to add local emergency managers in as a point of contact when there's high-risk dams. Then there's an alert or there's some other, reason for failure that needs to be as a point of contact, along with a variety of other items related to dam safety. And so as presented, though, outside of the language that she was working on, there was some other language that could have caused a high financial risk for the county, putting us in a position that if these high-risk dams were identified as imminent threat, a locality could then be responsible for those costs. And so we worked with DCR, VACO, and VML as well, and there was language amended to address our concerns that took and satisfied that we would not be held responsible holding the bag. Senator McPike introduced a bill this past session and as related to school construction. And so this kind of, not that it came out of nowhere, because this has been a topic that we've all been lobbying for, but it was a little bit different than last year's version, and it's got some non-supplanting language in there. And so we believe that this will help address the administration's concerns for why it was vetoed last year. It's passed the Senate and will cross over to the House. Senator Surville introduced a collective bargaining bill by public employees. So we have done an estimated assessment of what that would cost to the county, which would be around $200 million if something like this were to be implemented. And so we're vocalizing strong opposition to this topic. It has been referred to a committee, but has yet to actually hit a docket. And then just one other topic to bring to your attention. So Senator Marston has been working on the topic of juvenile detention facilities for about the last 5 years. There was a Commission on Youth study that was presented last summer. There's been a lot of work on his end on this, and quite frankly, he's been just, this topic he will not let it go. And so there was a bill presented that would require closure and consolidations of juvenile detention facilities across the state. It is a very bad bill, just quite simply. It's harmful for a variety of reasons. Marilyn Brown, our Director for Juvenile Justice Services, has been fantastic with her statewide organization, providing us with information. So there's been mass communication between VML and VACO as well for strong opposition to this. Overall, this type of, if something like this were to happen, it really just hurts the very vulnerable population to be able to take care of our juvenile youth in the Commonwealth that need to have this service close to home. And so, again, continuing to communicate or advocate against this bill. So with that, there's also still a good number of bills that we're waiting for in the House to be assigned to committees. And so there's, again, 12 days left till crossover. And so the intensity of this short session is really going to pick up next week. Turn it over to Casey for just a few budget updates.
Just to clarify, too, with the Juvenile Detention Center, that may make a lot of news in a variety of ways, and Ms. Spillman, you can correct me, but we are not necessarily on the list to be closed as much as being a premier facility that they want others who are closed to negotiate with us to fill up our facility. So I just want to give a recognition to Marilyn Brown, who's the overseer of our Juvenile Detention Center, to being one of the few listed in the state as the desired place for juveniles to go to. Having said that, we designed that facility to serve a population of our juveniles and don't want to run into an overcapacity issue where we would then have to send our own children afar for services that need to be local.
Yeah, there's 7 facilities that would close in this bill, and both Richmond was identified as a closure and Henrico was identified as a closure, and Chesterfield's listed as a location where both of those would be sending their residents.
So on the budget topic, we did share with you all an update when the governor's proposed amendments to the second year of the biennium were released in December. And so just last week, the member budget amendments were also released. The Senate General Fund budget amendments totaled over $7.9 billion. And the House was similarly about $6.9 billion. Some of those amounts are just placeholder amounts, but you get a sense of scale of how many requests there are for limited resources. We're not hearing a lot on the budget, but what we are hearing is that likely a lot of the major initiatives are going to be one-time investments. There's less available revenue in the out years of the state budget, so anything getting funded is likely to be one-time funding. You're all familiar with the MedFlight topic. Two budget amendments are being put in, one by Senator Hashmi and one by Delegate McQuinn. Just to recap, we are asking for an additional $950,000 in state general fund dollars to address the funding gap on MedFlight. This is to support the county's flight medic positions that work in partnership with the Virginia State Police on the MedFlight. That program serves over 60 localities in the Commonwealth, and so we have, as part of our advocacy, reached out with information about this request to members representing those localities, as well as our own delegation, to let them know how crucial this is for the program. Senator Hashmi also proposed an amendment to tackle the entire slate of JLARC recommendations. That's over $1.1 billion. Not likely to see all of that get funded, but appreciate the thought that goes into that. We've also seen some smaller scale adjustments proposed for individual pieces of those JLARC recommendations. So looking at the English language learners, the at-risk add-on, or eliminating the support cap. So we're seeing those piecemeal amendments as well. A language amendment was also offered in both the House and the Senate to strike budget language. This is language that reverses what is in the Code of Virginia for excess clerk fees. Currently, 2/3 of that is going to the state and 1/3 is staying local. It should, in the code, it's the opposite of that. So language is being put in to bring it back to what is in the code. There's also a few compensation topics that come up, some comp board positions, registrar funding, and enhanced retirement benefits. This would be the state portion of that enhanced retirement benefits for 911 dispatchers. And then we also saw a budget amendment from Senator Marsden on that juvenile detention topic as well. So we are advocating on all those topics for how best to support Chesterfield with our members.
Board members, any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, a question on the juvenile facility bill. So they proposed to close these other facilities and said that they could send children here. Is it part of the bill that they would have to pay a fee to us?
There is some funding, but funding was one of the primary focuses of the study. And so the senator believed that there was some efficiencies to be realized with funding, but the reality is there's still a cost that goes along with, and the localities are covering most of those costs themselves, but yes, there is some money, but it doesn't cover the full freight.
Mr. Carroll, if I could just add to that, too, it most likely would be very similar to a per diem charge, but the way the bill is, it's vague almost. It says, we just trust that you can negotiate to that point, which that doesn't really provide the path.
And we don't anticipate it moving forward?
No, there seems to be strong opposition, and I think we're hearing that most folks are interested in voting no.
Okay, thank you.
But it kind of begs the question, which ones would remain open and which ones would close? Did they give a sense of what that criteria was?
So again, there was a study done. It was presented to the Commission on Youth, that identified some key findings based on what they believed. But there's also questions on the study itself, based on who was involved and who wasn't involved when that study was prepared. So they used that as the basis for determining the facilities that were identified in the bill.
Okay.
Regarding the recovery homes, I think that's Van Valkenburg, so it would put more state regulatory around it, and so instead of just VARR in charge, it would have someone actually doing checks on the facilities?
So that's yet to be determined.
Okay.
And so the work group that would be led by DBHDS would bring together key stakeholders, which would include VAR and Oxford Homes, but it also identifies localities to be part of that, and working towards identifying how that solution is going to lay out. But we are advocating for state oversight and state administration.
Last question. And did you say that all of the bills that were submitted for by right accessory dwelling units have been defeated now?
No. So they were passed by for the week, and so we'll see them up again next week.
I mean, I think just for the community to understand, if, understanding one of the bills right, and I'm not sure if it's one that's already been killed or not, but essentially what they want to do is make it so that if you own a house anywhere, you can pop up an accessory dwelling unit. All you have to do is get a permit. Am I correct on that?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
Without anything, so.
There's
so
no
we-
local process.
So, as an example, we had a zoning case here a couple of years ago where someone brought forward a conditional use permit for accessory dwelling, and the neighbors came out of the woodwork to oppose the case. This particular person was just going to build an accessory dwelling unit for their father to live in. And of course, we passed it, and of course, there was such acrimony in the neighborhood, that person decided to sell the house and get out of there. But imagine if you took Mad Green, and by right, everybody could turn around and just pop up an accessory dwelling unit, or Brandon Mill, or any neighborhood in Chesterfield County. How hard it would be for us to, look at, for example, school funding, and even to anticipate how many students could be popped up in a neighborhood out of nowhere that we would had no idea about, and all people had to do is get a permit to put it up. So
Yeah.
we're not against accessory dwelling units. I think it's a great way for people's family and parents, but I think that neighbors, quite frankly, and sometimes in neighborhoods, in neighborhoods associations and others need to have a voice in that, as opposed to just a blanket, you can go ahead and do it. Now, when you get out maybe in rural areas, 5-acre plus lots where people are more separated, that might be a different issue. And that's something we could actually do in our own code if we decided to, but which is not up for proposal right now. But when I looked at those bills, it was concerning.
Yeah, we agree. And, this summer, again, at the Housing Commission, this topic, as it was part of their program to look at, Mr. Smith came down, gave a great presentation on ADUs to help just educate, too, of how they're being utilized in our community, because they are. I mean, where we have the process in place today for conditional use, and it's predominantly families that are housing their relatives, aging parents, or, bring other families on site. And so, but again, that's our ability to make those decisions based on what our community needs and wants. So, thank you.
On the med flight bills, are they in as one-time funding, or we think that that's in for permanent funding if it's passed?
The hope would be ongoing funding, yeah. And so just for clarification on that too, last year the governor's proposed budget included funding. The House kept it in, Senate pulled it out and sent it to study at OEMS with a report that was due by October the 1st. The report never materialized. We did see a report that was published December the 1st. And so in addition to that, the report and the budget language was asking for those funds to come out of the Trauma Care Fund. And so we have always initiated, that's concerning that MedFlight does more than just trauma care transports. And so as it pertains to law enforcement activities such as search and rescue and other transports to specialty care hospitals, like Johnston Willis for the neurocare unit there, there's uses beyond trauma care funds and that the services that these flight medics are providing. And so that's why we asked for general fund dollars to support the flight medics.
And what do you think the temperature is on eliminating the sport cap on K-12?
I think that there's interest. I don't know to the extent at which they will be able to accomplish it, though. I think the governor has vocalized some hesitancy to put the funding in. And so I think there's definitely interest from the General Assembly, though.
Well, the two of you certainly have your hands full, and we wish you well in keeping us informed and advocating on behalf of our citizens. Thank you for all your work down there.
Thank you.